Duel Devastator is the perfect product for an aspiring competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player, and I don't say that lightly. I certainly have been critical over some Yu-Gi-Oh sets in the past, but overall, if we compare Duel Devastator to almost any other set like it, it truly is in a league of its own. The big difference here is that in Duel Devastator, you have 56 cards, and of those 56 cards, you are guaranteed to get one copy of each of them in every box of Duel Devastator. Why is this different? Well, it's different because these cards are cards that are meant for your extra deck and your side deck. You don't find too many main deck options in this set. Certainly some of these cards, the more tech options that are good right now, are found occasionally in main decks, but most often when you're looking at these cards, they're either extra deck cards or anti-meta cards, cards that are going to go in your side deck for duels against certain matchups. And I wanted to make today's video, which are my top 5 reprints in Duel Devastator, because not everyone wants to buy the entire box. I know there have been some complaints about certain reprints not making an appearance, but I think overall the set is fantastic, especially for someone that doesn't have a lot of these cards, because I think competitive players like myself that already have all the cards in the set, we might take it for granted, but when you think of like someone that's just starting to get into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, they might not have a lot of these side deck options for certain matchups, so something like this is super helpful. If you're someone that just bought a structure deck a year ago or 6 months ago and you're like ready to make that first step into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, this really is the perfect product for you. And I know a lot of you guys are probably buying cards from this set, or perhaps buying the sealed box itself, or maybe you're just stocking up on cards from the ban list that was revealed yesterday. But if you're doing any of those things or buying any card game products just in general, please use my link to tcgplayer.com. It'll be in the description below. A portion of all of those sales that you guys do after clicking that link goes right back into the channel, so I really appreciate it when you use that. You don't necessarily have to buy Duel Devastator cards or ban list cards, but I feel like a lot of people will be doing that, so make sure to use that link anytime you shop on TCG Player if you want to help out my channel. I do want to quickly give out 2 honorable mentions before we get into the main list: Artifact Lancia and the Dino Wrestler Prankertops. And the reason I'm doing this is because these cards aren't very hard to get. I feel like most people already own them. They were originally printed both as commons. They both got secret rare upgrades in the Battles of Legend, and then Prankertops actually just received a reprint in the recent Megatins from 2019 and the Gold Sarcophagus tin. So I think that most people already own these cards, and you probably were. I mean, you've had these cards for a while, especially if you've been playing over the past like 9 months or so, because they've been so strong as side deck options. But just in case you don't own these by some random chance, this is definitely the time to pick them up. These cards are pretty much always going to come in and out of side decks for the rest of time until something better comes out, but they really do seem like really versatile cards. Artifact Lancia has been around since 2014 and is still seeing play to this day, so I think right now, if you don't have these cards, is one of the best times to pick them up. Maybe you didn't pick up the secret rare upgrades when they came out in Battles of Legend, but you want to pick up some ultra rare copies from Duel Devastator, and now seems like the perfect time. At number 5, we have all of the Ghost Girl cards. Now these are sort of the main selling point. I mean, this is what Konami is really using to push this set, because they all have alternate artworks from Duel Devastator, and I feel like a lot of people, especially newer players, only have like Ash Blossom, or maybe they only have Ghost Ogre. I feel like these are the things that you want to pick up as an aspiring competitive player, because all sorts of different formats require you to play all sorts of different Ghost Girls depending on the matchups, depending on the expected metagame. So having a playset of all of them is a really smart idea if you don't already own them. Even if you do already own these cards though, the alternate artworks are really nice. I think they did a fantastic job. So I think that if you're really looking to expand your collection by giving you more side deck options, or if you just want some new artwork on some already fantastic cards, Duel Devastator is one of the places that you can go to do this. And I think it's really cool because Konami doesn't give us a ton of alternate artworks besides things like Dark Magician and Blue Eyes White Dragon, which is fine. I mean, those are cool cards, but I want to see more alternate artworks of competitive cards, and this is like a huge wave. I mean, this was a bunch of Ghost Girl cards, many of which, almost all of which actually have seen competitive use in some way, shape, or form, so getting alternate artworks for them is really, really awesome. Next up, we have Super Polymerization. Oh my gosh, do I love this card. This is one of the best pieces of removal right now, and even in the upcoming format, I think it'll still be played. This is the card that is found in the main deck and the side deck, and it was banned for a long time, then it went to 1, and then it went to 2, and now it's currently at 3 copies per deck. And even though this card actually had seen several reprints over the past couple years even, these cards were still very expensive. I mean, to get a playset of Super Poly, you were looking at, what, $30, $35, $40, depending on the rarity. But now this new Duel Devastator reprint, you can get 1 copy for less than $5 in most cases. And even though this is one of the best cards out of this set that people were really asking for, it is still relatively cheap. And I think if you're going to any any sort of competitive tournament over the next couple weeks, the next couple months, this is definitely a card you want to at least have the option to play at those events. I think most people know how strong Super Polymerization is, so I won't spend too much time talking about it. Just keep in mind, if you don't already own this card, you definitely should, just because it is probably going to be an excellent piece of removal for the next foreseeable future. I really mean that. I mean, dark monsters are going to be played for a while. You have so many strong dark extra deck monsters that this card is good against, but even if people aren't playing Starving Venom Fusion Dragon anymore, there are tons of other fusion monsters that you can summon with Super Poly that are equally as effective against a variety of matchups. Next up, we have a card many people would not expect me to put on this list, but I'm going to put it here for a few reasons, and that is Spell Canceller. Now, this is a card that might seem strange if you haven't been following the metagame or haven't been following this card, because it's like, well, who's really playing Spell Canceller right now? And you are correct, this card isn't super popular, but it was played just a few months ago in many Thunder Guard Dragon deck lists. You could very easily special summon it from your hand with Skull Dread, and that was very good because it stopped your opponent from using Super Poly to break your board. Hey, we just talked about Super Poly, here's a card that can stop that. But just in general, this card has been found to make its way into side decks format after format after format, and while it's not always a top pick, it is a card that really hadn't received many reprints. This card only has 2 printings, and they were pretty expensive. I mean, even when this card wasn't very popular, you were looking at over $10 a copy. Now you can pick this one up for less than $1, and that's really cool. The other reason this card is very exciting, though, is that this is the new problem-solving card text version, and that matters a lot because this thing says spell cards cannot be activated. The effects of all spell cards are also negated. This matters because the original printing of this card did not clarify all spell effects are still negated. It only said face-up spell effects are negated. So for example, if you had that original printing, you didn't know about the update. If your opponent tributed a True Draco spell card, its graveyard effect might still go off if you didn't catch yourself with the updated text. I do want to mention here that, of course, the card had already received an updated text, but a lot of people didn't have access to it, and a lot of people didn't really know it because it doesn't seem like a card that would change with an errata. Now that we have a newly reprinted version, though, that a lot of players will get their hands on, most players should know the updated text, which is really awesome and should sort of alleviate some of the confusion surrounding this card's effect. Next up, we have Called by the Grave, and this is something sort of similar to Artifact Lancia and the Dino Wrestler in that, yes, it has received many reprints. It has a super print and a common print and a prismatic secret reprinting, and yet this is still very welcome because this is a card that many players, many rogue players, many first-time competitive players want to have in their deck list, and it's a card that even with all of those reprints, and even though it was originally printed as a common, well, I say originally, I guess originally it was in the special edition as a super rare, but the first like core set printing was as a common, this is a card that was still very, very expensive for a playset, and that is pretty crazy. It really just goes to show how ubiquitous this card is. So that means if you don't own any copies of this card, or perhaps you only own a common and you want a rarity upgrade for cheap, you can now pick up these Duel Devastator ones for, at the moment, less than $2, which is an absolute steal. Call by the Grave is one of the best ways to combat hand traps, and hand traps, as you know, are everywhere. So if you're looking to play this card in your deck and you don't just want to play the commons, Duel Devastator is the cheapest way to get those awesome rarity upgrades. Before we go to our number 1 card that people were excited for in Duel Devastator, I want to give an honorable mention shout out to a card that almost made the list and probably would have maybe a couple months ago, and that is Wave Motion Cannon. So this thing only had a handful of printings from a very long time ago, and it really led this card's price to kind of go crazy for a little bit, especially when Mystic Mine was a more competitively viable strategy. I think this card was long overdue for a reprint, especially a holographic reprint, because it only had that super rare that was very, very expensive, and I think anyone playing Mystic Mine or any other burn deck is happy to see this card reprinted, even if it's not the most competitively viable option. I will say this seems like a weird fit for Duel Devastator as a set because it's not really a side deck card and it's obviously not an extra deck card, but I'm still really glad that they found the space for it because I think a lot of players appreciate a more budget friendly option if they're trying to play this card in whatever deck they want. That brings us to my number 1 pick for the best reprint in all of Duel Devastator, the one that has most people hyped, especially when the list was first revealed, and that is Saryuja's Skull Dread. This card has been reprinted once already. It was in the 2018 Megatons, but even that version of the card was pretty expensive until this reprint got announced. But this thing is really awesome because I know people have complained about this card, maybe when Guard Dragons were at full power, before we had Agripane banned, before we had Nibiru out, this card probably would have been something that I would consider to be limited at some point, but most people aren't abusing this card anymore. It's just a good generic Link 4 monster that some decks can take advantage of. I would actually say it's a more specific Link 4 monster than something like Borosword Dragon or Borolo Dragon. Those cards can pretty much see play in any sort of deck, but this one is pretty strictly for combo-based strategies, and even though maybe someday this card will find itself on the Forbidden and Limitless, I think ever since Nibiru came out, we haven't seen people abusing Skull Dread nearly as much as we did like before that card, just because yes, there certainly are combo decks and people can still play this card if they want some draw power, but it's a lot riskier nowadays with all the hand traps running around there, especially Nibiru. That being said, because of how much this card has been used competitively and because of how expensive even the reprinted version was, it makes a lot of sense for this card to be in Duel Devastator. And I think originally when the first couple cards got revealed for this set, this is one of the most talked about ones, just because so many people still didn't have access to this card, or at least not a budget friendly way to play it. Remember, if you want to buy any of the cards that I just mentioned, please use that TCG Player link. It'll be in the description below. Before I end the video though, I want to go over 2 Halloween themed monsters because I know I'm a couple days behind. So the first card that we're going to look at is Gozuki. We've already reviewed Mizuki, and this is a card that was sort of released as an extra option and actually has seen some competitive play both in the TCG and Duel Links. So this is a level 4 zombie monster, Earth, with 1700 attack and 800 defense, and it says during your main phase you can send 1 zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard. Oftentimes that is sending Mizuki, sometimes not, but a lot of times it is. And then it says if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can banish 1 zombie from your graveyard except Gozuki, special summon 1 zombie monster from your hand. You can only use each effective Gozuki once per turn. So in pretty much every single modern zombie deck, you're going to be playing at least 1 or 2 copies of Gozuki. It's so good that even in Duel Links where they didn't have Mizuki, this card was still a very competitively viable option for pretty much every single zombie deck, sort of proving that even without Mizuki, which is what this card is clearly designed to work with, it is still a very powerful zombie monster. The second card we're going to look at is a card we've already talked about in today's video. Wait a second, how does that even work? Oh, it works because we're talking about Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Yes, this card is in fact a zombie monster, so it'll fit our theme for today's video. We're talking about this card because this is a card that obviously came out in Duel Devastator, but it's just a really good zombie monster, by far one of the best hand traps ever released, if only for the fact that it's good against almost every single matchup you'll face. While cards like Artifact Lancia, maybe DD Crow, and other hand traps are more impactful against specific matchups, Ash Blossom is always the safest option as far as main deck hand traps go right now because it's simply so good against not only meta decks but also rogue decks, where some of the more specific hand traps, even things like Nibiru, might not come up against every single matchup. If you haven't picked up your Ash Blossom, of course you can pick it out of Duel Devastator, but it's still a card that I wanted to talk about on this list, and this seems like the perfect video to do so because it's in the set we're talking about. I'm very excited for Duel Devastator, and we'll open one on the channel either later today or perhaps tomorrow, depending on when I can actually get it, if I can go to my locals today. But just know that if you buy any of the cards from Duel Devastator, use that link in the description below. I know I'm pushing it a lot lately, but I know you guys are buying a lot of cards. You got the ban list, you have Duel Devastator, whether or not it's sealed or just singles. A lot of people are buying a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh product right now, and that is one of the easiest ways to support the channel without giving me any money, because I don't have a Patreon, I don't take a ton of donations, even on live streams I don't really ask for them. But if you want to support the channel by doing something you already be doing, buying Yu-Gi-Oh cards, that's the easiest and best way to do it without you guys actually spending any extra. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.